Welcome to episode 34 of Radio Omnicor. It's really great to be back. We've been offline for a while because of COVID, and this is going to be our first recording where we're completely online. And as a result, we're really lucky to have Professor Bateman as our guest. Tom is based in America. He's affiliated with the University of Virginia. He lives in Chicago. And it's a real honor and privilege to have a conversation with him today. We spoke about the nature of proactivity, of which he is an expert, and in fact some people will talk about him as the real father of the construct. Amy Goble, our industrial psychologist, participates, which is really cool for her. And as usual, Hilton Rudnick, the MD of Omnicor, puts Tom through his paces. And what I really found fascinating about the conversation is that we sometimes mistake productivity for proactivity, and we can underestimate how important a concept proactivity is in leadership and really what it looks like in a good leader. And on that note, Tom speaks a bit about his article that he wrote for Psychology Today, and that refers to Donald Trump, and that him signing multiple executive orders does not mean he's proactive. And what's really interesting about Tom is his new passion that he speaks about, which is climate change and how proactivity is important in that concept. I think you're going to love the session and enjoy all the interesting different aspects of proactivity. Okay, good. Welcome, Tom. It's so wonderful to have you on the podcast at Radio Omnicor. And in studio today, we have Hilton. And joining us in addition is Amy, a wonderful industrial psychology intern. And maybe it would just be wonderful to start, Tom, with you giving us a bit of what's been keeping you busy today and a little bit of an intro from your side.
I mean, honestly, like everyone else, including you all, the coronavirus is top of mind. And I am semi-retired right now, but I'm still writing and we've got a family venture now. Our son went to culinary school and is a restaurant manager. We now own a family restaurant, but it had to shut down, and now it's reopened. But I'm guessing it's going to shut down again. That's top of mind right now, other than looking forward to this conversation.
Right. And that's such an important context that you raised and a difficult one for everyone. And Hilton, do you want to do a quick check-in?
So maybe I just want to first of all thank Tom for taking the time to be with us. I've only known Tom really for a couple of months, and I got to know Tom because he's an authority on, I think, many different things in the world of psychology, and I think very much in the world of applied psychology in leadership. But I came across an article of Tom's which was about the creation of a tool to measure proactivity. And as an assessment provider, we were very interested in the psychometric properties and just what the tool really gave to organizations who were interested in this construct. And I contacted Tom, and he was just so generous with his time and his thinking, and really gave a lot of input into the thinking around this, and we did a workshop on it. So first of all, really just to thank Tom for all of that. But I know Tom's moved on. The article I'm talking about is probably 25 years old, and I think Tom's involved in many, many different aspects, and who knows where his career journey has taken him. So I think, Tom, it would be interesting for us just to hear some of the touch points of the main kind of things, like maybe the arc of your career and where it's gone, and kind of what you're interested in now would be interesting for us to hear.
Oh, well, thank you. And by the way, it's been very fun getting to know you by email, fun and interesting right out of the gate. And I'm glad to finally be talking with you. Yeah, I'm a longtime academic, and then 2 years ago, semi-retired. So I'm not full-time teaching now, but I still write a management textbook, and I blog for Psychology Today and write some other articles. You mentioned that article that you found. It was 1993, which what? Well, that is more than 25 years ago.
Mm.
And I guess I'll mention at this point, I spent prior to that, I did research on a number of different topics and would enjoy the process and would enjoy publishing, but I never followed up on the same topic. I always jumped to some other altogether different topic. And then that proactivity article just felt somehow different, that there was something deeper here that might sustain my interest over time, and it has become a topic around which most, if not all, of my subsequent research has revolved. So proactivity, after a long time of not really getting excited for about one single topic, proactivity is broad but very deep, and it's been exciting for me ever since. So I'm glad we're going to be talking about it today.
Great. And Amy, I wonder if you want to just put your voice in and say hi and give a quick
Thanks,
intro.
Colleen. Yes, I'm really excited to be part of this podcast. I think personality is something that really fascinates me, and I'm really looking forward to hearing, Tom's perspective and, how he came to write on this topic. I think, being busy with a thesis in personality at the moment as well, it's really an opportunity to learn as well. So thank you for having
very
me.
good, very good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, we could touch on personality for sure, off and on through the conversation.
So Amy, that seems like a good place to start, because I think you've got an interest in that. So why don't you go ahead with your question for Tom?
Thanks, Colleen. So Tom, I think one of my sort of main fascinations with personality is the debate on, whether personality is something that's more fixed or fluid. I would just be interested to hear your take on that.
That's a very good opening question. And I guess there's a lot of different angles on that important question. My first thoughts are, first off, that some personality traits are more fixed than others. Some are more fixed than others. But from what I understand of the data, there's a fair amount of evidence showing that personality traits can fluctuate over time. So there do seem to be unfolding developmental processes by which traits change over time. I guess extroversion versus introversion is one of the most famous of all personality traits. And I think that one has been understood for a long time to be more fixed than others. It's apparently got a neurological foundation that if a person early on is extroverted, that's likely to remain a constant attribute, and likewise for introversion. Although I want to highlight right out of the gate, it is very possible to break out of a stereotype or a mold of one trait and exhibit the behaviors of the other trait. And in fact, that's kind of a theme underlying our work in proactivity. A person can make decisions to break out of the image they have of themselves. So I kind of think that it's a useful perspective to feel like a trait is fluid for yourself. In other words, you can behave in ways, if the circumstance calls for it, you're very capable of behaving in ways that are different from your fundamental tendencies. An introvert can enjoy an extroverted situation and behave appropriately and perform well, so to speak, in situations that are not maybe naturally comfortable, but you can learn, and vice versa. An extrovert can learn how to be less extroverted when the circumstance calls for it. So I think a good perspective is the traits that you think describe yourself, you are very capable of breaking out of the mold. And from another perspective altogether, part of my mindset is about, I've always been in business schools and management departments. My field is organizational behavior, including leadership. From a perspective of being a manager or a leader, I've often been asked, how do you change a person's personality, meaning somebody else's personality that you maybe don't like or that frustrates you just somehow? And I think the honest answer is you really can't. You might be able to change certain specific things with the right kind of feedback and coaching, so to speak, but I wouldn't set an objective as big as hoping to change the personality of one of your direct reports or one of your peers or one of your bosses. In fact, can I add, Professor Brian Little has done some of my favorite research. I wrote a piece called "This May Be Your Most Important Personality Trait, period, no, comma, really, like really it is." And it's what Professor Brian Little calls a free trait, F-R-E-E, a free trait. And his whole point is your traits are not fixed. If you're an introvert, you can behave in an extroverted fashion, and vice versa. They are free to vary if you put your mind to it.
So, I mean, maybe I can come in there with a bit of a follow up. And Tom, I'm very interested in this topic because we are also in the business of developing people and we work in coaching. And so, I mean, while we may hold that things like introversion and extroversion are relatively contiguous over a lifespan, we would still, maybe if you took someone who was an introvert and it was required of them to socialize more, to act more outgoing, that you could coach them on the behaviors that were required to kind of meet those expectations. Would you agree with that, or would you, or not?
I would absolutely agree with that, including as you would think, starting with small challenges and getting people comfortable. You know about self-efficacy,
Sure.
training in self-efficacy, and maybe there's no better example than public speaking. Introverts sometimes, and I put myself in the same category, fearful of public speaking. Well, little tests that gradually expand the range. An introvert can be an extremely good public speaker. And one example of that is so many comedians, as I've read many times, so many comedians are inherently introverted, but
Right.
learned how to light up the stage.
I think that's a good segue then into my question, Tom, which is you've been known to say that proactivity is a superpower. And I really like that. And I was wondering then, how would you develop that if it is something that you know you lack a little bit?
Well, I think that's a superbly important question. When we first designed the instrument that Hilton you came across from that original article, we had in mind a personality type of some people being more proactive than other people. And it's kind of a complicated, complex concept, but it begins with being more action oriented than other people. But there's a lot more to it than that. But we originally figured some people are inherently and over time more proactive than other people, instinctively are, so to speak. However, we've come a long way from thinking it's just a personality trait. It is very learnable, malleable, teachable, etc. So that a person who generally doesn't consider him or herself very proactive can learn about the idea here and put it close to top of mind to get a person to think more frequently and more strategically about what are my multiple options here. Instead of operating purely by instinct and rather unthinkingly, which might mean I just passively go with the flow, how to think strategically and think about what are my options and which ones will have the biggest payoffs, which one would be the wisest choice in this circumstance I am. I called it a superpower because since our original piece, it's been a very active research topic in my field of organizational behavior. And now a lot of research is accumulating, showing an incredible number of positive effects of behaving proactively, being action oriented, being future focused, to think about longer term effects, thinking about what trajectory I'm on now, or my team is on now, or my company is on now, what trajectory are on now, and where is it heading. Therefore, what trajectory changes should we try to initiate in order to head toward a more successful future? If you want to get deeper into it, I can tell you about the various positive effects. But on that, I mean, there's risk to it, to being proactive. Not everybody might like the direction you want to go, so there's some risk. But on that, over time, being more proactive has more benefits than being not passive, shall we say, through life and through a career.
Colleen, Tom, maybe I just want to follow up there. And, because we now are looking at the instrument and measuring people and just kind of, I think we've only got a nascent start with it. But I'm concerned about the people who come out low in proactivity. And I'm wondering is it something that's now like a must have? In other words, we really have a requirement that everyone should be thinking of being a disruptor in some way, of bringing innovation, a change agent, those kind of things. Or is there place in the workplace for people who just want to execute, they just want to get on with it, they don't have an interest? Is that still a space for like a good solid grouping of people to occupy?
Oh, absolutely. There's space to occupy there, and in fact, if every person in the team is a highly proactive individual, it could be chaos.
Right.
So there's plenty of room for, in a team setting, for instance, sort of not only getting a feel for one another and strengths and weaknesses, what people most want to do and least want to do, but also negotiating roles. There's a lot of classic, half century old role descriptions and the need for different people to play different roles. Well, conversations and negotiations around roles regarding proaction would be a fine thing to have, and you can sort of tease your way through it and figure out how to optimize across multiple people. I would highlight, in the spirit of your question, I would highlight that it is not a negative thing or an insult to score low on the instrument, the productivity measure. And by the way, throughout most of my early life, I would have scored low on proactivity. And that's not an insult or anything to get down about. But the scale really is full of items that are behavioral in nature. And once a person is aware of what constitutes proaction, a person can think strategically about when to swing into action, which problems to tackle, which problems to not tackle, what opportunities to pursue, and which ones to leave it to others to pursue. You can think your way strategically through it, and on net over time can become wise in your selections of actions.
Right.
Do you mind if consistent with maybe all the questions so far, can I mention one of my favorite things about the Myers-Briggs, which I know you all are familiar with, and maybe most of
Sure.
the audience, maybe all of your audience? It's on the point about being developmental and not being so set in your ways that you cannot change. There was a time when I went through the formal training in England and did a lot of Myers-Briggs teaching, and the standout thing that they did that I remember best from the training, that I always said when I was training people with it, but it never sunk in, was a metaphor. If you're familiar with the instrument, and your audience, many people are, you know that it classifies people into a 4x4 grid with 16 cells in it, right? With four
Right.
ISTJ, ESNP, whatever. A person gets placed in a cell. At the end of my 2-day training that I took, they did something what I found very memorable, and I would push it on anybody who teaches Myers-Briggs or sits for Myers-Briggs. At the end of our training, they used the metaphor of a house with 16 rooms in it. So imagine the 4x4 grid with the 16 Myers-Briggs cells. Imagine that square, and imagine it is a house with 16 rooms in it. And put a little tent roof over the top of it so it looks like a house. And as they put it, Myers-Briggs is telling you, when you're off on say a business trip for a couple weeks and you finally get home again, the way you scored on their instrument, that's the room that you'll probably gravitate to because you just want to crash and relax and enjoy yourself. But they are not saying you should spend your life in that one room.
Right.
You should spend your life enjoying different aspects of all 16 rooms in your house. And I love that metaphor. I always used it when I taught it. But no matter how often I said it, it seemed to me that people would leave a Myers-Briggs session thinking that XYZA is their cell, and that's where they're always going to be. And then so and so is four other letters, and that's where they're always going to be. So
Right.
the mindset here is so important about the ability to grow beyond what a single instrument says about you.
Right, I think, and that's particularly true in a typology, which the Myers-Briggs kind of breaks down everybody into the 16 different types. And maybe, I think critics of the Myers-Briggs would say it doesn't go far enough in showing the full gamut of complexity of human functioning, and that there's something too narrowing about just coming up with the 16 different types, and people are much richer than that.
So true. So very true.
Mm.
Amy, do you want to have a question for
Yeah, it's
Tom?
just in listening to that metaphor, Tom, I think one of the things that kind of sparked for me was contextually and sort of situational conditions. So much like you said, there's 16 rooms and you can move around maybe in different contexts, you'll come out in a different set of behaviors. Does that relate back to this proactivity trait?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, part of proactivity mean, and by the way, I really defined it much, but we can do that whenever you feel like it, and give some examples. But with the basic idea that it's being action oriented rather than passive. You want to think. Proactivity is strategic. It is based in thinking about what one option might be passivity or to not do anything. But if you see a problem that you're interested in trying to solve, that nobody else is working on, but you think you ought to, or you see an opportunity that might be worth pursuing, but nobody else in your firm is, you got to think strategically about whether to go after it or not. Some bosses will love a person to show initiative. Other bosses will not want to see much initiative. They just want people to do what the boss tells them to do and meet the standards, the performance standards that the boss specifies. So that's a domain where the more the people score low on the test, like Hilton brought up earlier, would fit. A boss would love that. Some bosses would love that. Others love to see initiative. Every organization has a culture. Sometimes a weak culture, sometimes a strong culture. But you want to pick and choose your actions based on what will fit well versus what won't fit well. And by the way, too, you have to think of your own strengths and weaknesses. Is
Mm.
something I can pull off successfully? Or what kinds of strategic thinking and what kind of advice and collaborations will it take to make it work? There's a risk to being proactive because you might fail.
Mm.
There's upside because you might succeed and do something that benefits both your employer and your colleagues and your boss and your direct reports, etc. So those are the kinds of contextual things that need to be considered strategically, and they help to minimize the risk, and they will help to maximize the net positive effects over time.
So, Tom, maybe it would be a good idea to give us a definition, if you don't mind.
Sure, happy to. In fact, I think it's a pretty big point that I'd love to make, and I think it pertains to what we do, those of us in this conversation, and most of your listeners. There are so many concepts, including important, intriguing, useful ones in our field, that have sort of a shallow stereotype to them, but in fact are a lot deeper and more complex and more profound. So, in the case of being proactive, so the classic line is, I should have been more proactive, he or she should have been more proactive, I wish we had been more proactive. It's a classic line, we hear it all the time. I think it's usually applied, or when people say that, they're usually saying, I should have started earlier so I didn't find myself in this last minute jam. Or she should have thought of that ahead of time and done something about it instead of being surprised right now. But proactivity is far more and more profound than simply not procrastinating. So, couple examples. One is a true anecdote, apparently a true anecdote, by a well known economist from several decades ago. lived in Massachusetts, was off on spring break or a summer vacation at the Cape Cod, and was driving back to Boston with his family, cruising along, and then suddenly traffic backed up, and they were backed up. Now they're inching along after having had free reign at full speed. Now they're just inching along. An hour later, they came to the bottleneck, and cars were inching around off the road, around something, and then back onto the road, and then they could step on the gas. Well, once this economist got to the point, they could see what it was. There was a mattress in the middle of the road, a bed mattress, and everybody was creeping around it and then hitting the gas. Nobody that the economist saw stopped, took 30 seconds or a minute, and pulled the mattress off the road. It's proactive to spot a problem, especially a problem that nobody else is fixing, and do something about it. So that's part of the action-oriented thing. And I would add that especially where nobody else is acting, that's a sign of genuine productivity. By the way, another element of proactivity is the future orientation. Whoever subsequently, at some point, probably somebody pulled the mattress off the road, they are creating a better future for all the people behind them on the road. Proactivity has a future focus to it, a future orientation, and an eye toward getting off of our current trajectory, creating an inflection point that changes the trajectory and starts heading in toward a better direction that creates a better future. Proactivity is strategic, it is thoughtful rather than mindless. It creates change. It spots opportunities and goes after them and seizes them and makes things better. And the bigger the impact of your efforts, the more proactive it is. The longer term the impact is, the more proactive it is. The more positive impact it has on others, the more proactive it is. Hey, I think some of you might know a famous movie called 12 Angry Men.
Sure.
Yeah, good. It's very well known in the US, and I'm sure at least
Yes.
some other parts of
Yeah.
the world. But real quickly, the 1960s black and white, I think one of the greatest movies ever. The entire movie is set in a jury courtroom of 12 all men in that true story, deciding the guilt or innocence of a teenager who killed his father. They had to decide guilty or innocent. They start off like so many meetings start off. Let's take a vote. And 11 out of 12 voted guilty, and the boy would go to the electric chair back then in the 50s. One man raised his hand, and the other 11 were upset with him because he slowed down the conversation. They thought they were cruising to an easy decision. Why do you think he's guilty? They challenged him, and some of them were downright angry that he was slowing them down. He said, did I say this all right? Why do you think he's innocent? They said to him. Sorry about that. He said, I don't know that he's innocent. I just don't know whether he's guilty or not. And I'm not going to make a big mistake without thinking about it more deeply than we just did. And he changed the entire course of that important conversation. I think a person today sitting in a business meeting and people are not talking about the elephant in the room, for instance, the person who changes the direction of the conversation, that's an act of leadership, and that is an act of proactivity that leads to a more thoughtful decision than a vote, which is such a common process does.
Right.
So those are some of the main elements of proactivity. It's far more than not procrastinating. It's far more than starting into a task. Okay, excuse me.
Sorry, Tom. Would someone like Elon Musk be on the absolute extreme end of proactivity
I
there?
think absolutely. In fact, I was just debating whether to mention Elon Musk. You're right on. And I'll elaborate just a little bit. He's kind of a tiresome example, if I may say, because he's used so often, and plus he's not exactly the perfect individual, given some of his actions recently. Not everybody's a fan of his. But on the proactivity dimension, you were right on. He is on the extreme end. Proactivity relates to entrepreneurship, so he has started several companies. That is highly proactive, creating a company where there wasn't one in existence before. He is certainly thinking long term as he creates SpaceX and space travel, right?
Right.
He's talking about Mars and inhabiting Mars. He's talking about turning the human species into an interplanetary species.
Mm.
That may save the species. I would call that highly proactive.
Right.
That's a to-do list of
Yeah,
mine.
right. But I bring up the example of the 12 Angry Men to also highlight it doesn't need to be huge. It can be a quick, easy thing, like make a comment in a relatively easy thing, like make a comment in a meeting to change the direction of a conversation.
Mm. I think in a business like ours, where part of our culture is a welcoming of critical thinking, we want the most junior people in our business to tell us a way to do it better. That's like a real advantage in our business. And I'm wondering if proactivity has come of its time now, because the disruption of industries seems to be the only way that good companies survive these days. If you're doing things the way you did them 5 years ago, you're probably fallen behind quite dramatically. Have you noticed, Tom, that there's like a gaining of momentum around the requirement for the expression of productivity in the workplace?
I don't have data to support that, but I sure feel that way. I feel like I've noticed, and this is just another data point. You bring it up, and it
Mm,
really makes sense. You're right. Absolutely, people have been saying for decades that business is changing so much. Well, it continues to be true, and it continues to escalate in quantum leaps. So you're totally right about the need to adapt and the need to not only adapt to change but lead change. And I consider proactive leadership to be essential and really to be essentially strategically driven change leadership. I think is proactivity when you're impressing upon others the need for proaction. So I think you're right on. In management, in the research literature, there's a cultural thing called entrepreneurial orientation.
right.
And proactivity is one component of an entrepreneurial culture, be it a small company or within a big company. Proactivity. So if I totally agree with your comment there.
Mm. And I kind of think that a combination of a proactive orientation coupled with high cognition, with good problem solving, is probably the sweet spot. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for people who are really smart thinkers, but also forward thinkers, because they're the people who are going to drive your business forward.
Again, I think you're right on. It prompts me to say, in a way, back up in our conversation to add that about psychology and the fact that historically, psychology has focused often on how a person's past dictates how they behave today,
Mm,
or how present circumstances dictate how a person behaves today. But proactivity is about a future focused
mm, mm,
orientation and becoming more strategic about what lies ahead, what could lie ahead, and incorporating that into the repertoire. So making sure futures drive more what we do today.
right.
Past and present influences do. And by the way, your big point about thinking and problem solving, again, I agree 100%. I've written a lot about problem solving also. I think that's, I got so many things I want to say right now. First off, I said a couple times that proaction is strategic. Think about, I know you know Kahneman system one, system two,
Sure.
thinking, slow thinking. So
Mm,
much of what we do is heuristic cognitive biases that help us make decisions quickly.
mm,
But that doesn't mean we make the decisions well. And
right.
we need to slow down sometimes, be more deliberative and thoughtful. Systems two, strategic thinking. And that is a component of proaction. It's not just an action orientation, it is a
Yeah.
strategic approach to choosing the best actions with the future in mind.
Right.
And Tom, if I can come in there, I heard you once speak about how we have a bias towards our own ideas,
Ah,
and how that could also
yes.
not necessarily be helpful for business.
Yes, I looked it up not long ago. I wrote a blog for Psychology Today. The title was something about what we can learn about leadership from Donald Trump.
Sounds
And
like an oxymoron.
I know, I know. I mean, a quick reaction is yes, sure, we can learn a lot. What not to do is one reaction
Yes.
to that. And in a way that I didn't put that in put it in the title that way, but that was a theme of what I then wrote.
Mm,
There's something called in business called the not invented here syndrome, which is
mm,
to have faith in your own opinions and faith in your own ideas and less faith in the opinions and ideas of other people. And we've got a natural human bias, I mean, all else equal, to prefer our own opinions and judgments and decisions over others. And I wrote about the virus crisis. And President Trump, well, he took a lot of advice several years ago when he was campaigning and when he first became president. There were certain people that really guided his thinking, and it propelled him into the White House. But he's never trusted very many other people, and the number of people he trusts has shrunk considerably to the point where it's such a small inner circle. But he, like so many others these days, rejecting the opinions of experts, in this case doctors. In business, they talk about benchmarking and best practices are big things to do. Check out the best practices around the world and adopt the ones that suit your company best for the future. With the virus, there are best practices in different countries around the world and worst practices. We should adopt the best ideas no matter where they come from and not be overly biased toward our own, which may or may not be right.
mm. Yeah, I think politics has really got in the way of his thinking there. But I mean, I think that seems to be just the way he operates across a wide range of subjects and decisions.
Agreed. And I think, yeah, I want to add that Trump is easy to, diagnose and criticize, or easy for some to compliment. But I want to highlight that there's so much. Trump is extreme in so many ways, but the things that cause mistakes by him can identify tendencies that the rest of us have, and they're worth thinking about. We've got them more modestly, maybe, but not invented here is an example where he's extreme, but we
Mm.
all can succumb to that bias, preferring our own opinions over anybody else's.
I mean, it's like a confirmation bias as well, in that
Yes. Oh
you'll
yes. Oh
look for
yes.
evidence of the proof of your whatever you're thinking.
Right. Right. And he personifies confirmation bias writ large.
Right.
And I think the impact, one of your passions also, Tom, is climate change. And I guess this is where, his approach is just so dangerous.
Oh boy, that on the dangerous point, this another example of proaction is not the same as being action oriented. President Trump is action oriented in the sense that he signs a lot of executive orders to get rid of things, including things that we need to have. In that sense, he's action oriented, but he's not. Well, he doesn't exemplify the kind of proaction that we hope to see. Um, and he would call himself action oriented. I bet his supporters would call himself action oriented because he's done so many things with executive orders. But it's not proactive in a strategic
Mm.
or net positive benefit
Right.
sense.
Mm.
Regarding climate change, I got really into that topic, and in recent years I've been some writing on that topic. Climate change is a global, obviously, challenge, and it is a domain that epitomizes the need for proactivity. As people who pay attention to this know, we've known for decades, and it's been so difficult to impossible to get enough action, to get enough proaction. And we're certainly reaching we're in a window where we need proaction, much more proaction, far sooner than later.
Yeah, it's also one of those things where the payoffs of climate change and behaviors around climate change are not obvious straight away. They can take a generation or more to manifest. So the changes and the behavior changes that you're asking people to do are so far in advance that they may just not even deal with them now and see them as relevant.
That is right on. Also, we could use the general phrase psychologically distant. There,
Mm,
for not for everybody, of course. Some people getting hurt badly now, but
right.
so many people, including just powerful decision makers, the the harm is only conceptual and abstract, and way down the road for many decision makers. Also, far away geographically for many decision makers, and that's definitely one of the obstacles that makes it so difficult. By the way, the good news is in the late toward the end of the George W. Bush administration,
Mm,
Nancy Pelosi and Newt Gingrich did a at least one commercial together where they're sitting on a park bench together, political enemies, antagonists
mm,
of these enemies, actually telling the
mm,
public we need to act on climate change. It was a bilateral
right.
cause in the late aughts.
Partisan. Mm.
But then the economy crashed, and now
Mm,
people have more pressing things to worry about. And it lost currency. The good news is things are changing again in the other direction, and ultimately, maybe President Bush's negative actions will help bring it back into the fore. However, the virus, back to your point, Hilton, about present danger, the virus is now taking priority. There's a very important movement to make clear how the virus and nature go together. The virus and climate go together,
right.
along with the
Yeah.
economic recovery. Multiple problems need to be solved with similar solutions. We can attack several problems at once with
Mm,
the same kinds of problem solutions.
mm, mm.
Amy, I'm wondering if you've got any follow-up thoughts or questions about what
Yeah,
Tom's
so
been
just
saying.
listening, I was wondering, in terms of, moving towards being more proactive and developing, are there any sort of things that might mediate one's development of this? I've heard, you're talking about sort of that faith in one's own ideas, and in some ways, it could potentially, give somebody the confidence to follow through with their proactivity. Or are there anything you could, sort of share around what might facilitate or mediate someone's development of proactivity?
Uh, there's a lot of possible comments to make here. Uh, I guess I'll repeat a couple things to highlight them as being so important and try to add some things also. One is and again, this is relevant to our field altogether, to have a word for a concept is to help make it salient. Proaction, I think, should be a word that is top of mind much of the time. And to try to think in terms of it and fully knowing what it is. It's not what most people think, merely starting sooner rather than later. It's got deep, profound meanings to it. Is really important to make it part of the vocabulary and to bring it into conversations with other people. I think that's a real important starting point. A next step, which I haven't really elaborated, is to know to internalize the many benefits. Since paper, there have now been many studies that have shown, for instance, individuals who are more proactive over time, on net and on average, higher proactivity as kind of a mindset and a strategic or action orientation. Higher proactivity brings better job performance. This is for individuals.
Mm,
Better job performance has been demonstrated in a number of ways. higher job satisfaction, higher career satisfaction, even better career outcomes uh, like promotions and pay raises and being perceived as promotable both in the internal job markets and external job markets. Proactivity predicts being onboarded more successfully and more quickly and thoroughly, and being more innovative. It predicts well-being in a variety of ways, including a person who's undergoing a lot of stress. A proactive approach to coping with stress means thinking about your own job stress strategically, identifying the root causes, and then thoughtfully tackling the root causes to remove the sources of stress, which is far beyond just exercise. I mean, not this is not to minimize, but the classic advice is to exercise and diet and get enough sleep and things like that, and mindfulness and meditation. And it's true that all those things are good things, but they don't get at the root cause. And proaction, that's part of proactive thinking. Anyway, the list of advantages. Oh, you're seen as more of a leader if you exhibit proactivity. So there are all kinds of advantages. Uh, anyway, those things, to embrace what we know, is a starting point for caring about becoming more proactive.
Yes.
And then if you're low on self-efficacy, then they sort of classic exercises like think of times when you weren't proactive and you look back at it and you realize you should have been, and what would that have entailed, and how could you have pulled that off successfully, and so forth. Or identifying simple little steps toward proaction that are not hard to execute, and a kind of a gradual shaping kinds of training. Choose one thing to get more proactive about and lay out an action plan. What would it mean to not just passively flow through your career, but to think more strategically about your career and get more proactive about it? What would be the initial steps and how those happen, etc.? Identify one problem that you often think about in the shower that somebody ought to tackle that. And what would be your first step? And likewise, one opportunity that you think about in the shower. What if you were to actually go for it, etc.?
A good solution-focused approach there, Tom, it sounds like. Just,
Yeah,
take baby steps and focus on the positive and bit of courage and make it work. Yeah.
yeah, the kinds of advice that's relevant to other kinds of self-development.
Right.
By the way, should I mention a book that I'd recommend? It's
Yes,
not one,
please.
Yes.
but since that first article, many scholars this is mainly in the management domain have studied proactivity, and now a couple years ago is kind of the best source, the Bible, I would say, of this topic. The book is titled "Proactivity at Work: Making Things Happen in Organizations." The editors are Sharon Parker and Uta Bindle. Uda's name is UTA, and then Bindle, and Sharon Parker are the editors. And that covers just a vast domain, showing how broad and deep this arena is. And by the way, may I add while I think of it, most of what we do is not very proactive. To be genuinely an effective proaction is really a whole different category of behavior that is rare, unique, but highly important.
Tom, that's fascinating, and I've got that book, by the way. So, Colleen and Amy, if you're interested in it, I can share my copy. Um, I know that you've done a lot of work in the leadership realm, and I'm not really familiar. I read up a lot of the things you've done in Proaction, but I'm not really familiar. And I saw you got a ton of articles around leadership. Um, I, in the psychological sciences, I've always found that the science of leadership is a bit woolly. And I mean, you could make that argument for psychology and social sciences in general, but in leadership in particular, I found it a bit woolly. I mean, I'd be very fascinated to hear your current thinking around leadership and leadership research?
I appreciate the question, and I'm glad to think out loud a little bit. If you can hear a smile in my voice, that's because
Mhm.
I've been to South Africa only once, and woolly is not a common word in the U.S. It means I'm thinking it probably means fuzzy or ill-defined or vague.
Mm,
Does that sound
fluffy.
about fluffy? Okay, all right, good.
Mm,
I do my best to introduce that to the vernacular this side of the pond. Um, but I love the question. In fact, I'd love to write a piece about kind of pet peeves about leadership,
mm,
pet woolly peeves, I guess, about leadership. Uh, so I'll start with a big picture comment, and I'm not to name drop, but one of the great, far be it from me, but one of the great climate scientists for decades is Michael Mann, who published the iconic hockey stick that showed
mm,
in recent decades uh, uh, global temperatures rising along with carbon dioxide emissions rising in the shape of a hockey stick. He's just a phenomenal climate scientist and a very visible public intellectual. But I co-authored an article with him about leadership in the domain of climate change. And a primary point we made is that there's a big supply and demand imbalance, which is to say, we've got incredible demand worldwide and locally for effective leaders.
mm,
We don't have nearly the supply of effective leaders that we need. So I just felt prompted to start my comments on
mm.
leadership with that. And I urge people, a lot of people hold themselves back from leadership kinds of roles. And there's a lot of reasons to not hold yourself back. I think a lot of people underestimate their ability to make differences in productive ways, good ways. But regarding the substance of leadership per se, I'd be interested in your thoughts, Hilton, too. But and we could talk again after this, maybe. But since I started blogging and writing for Psychology Today and elsewhere, I'm seeing Twitter and blogs and those kinds of writings about leadership. And the most striking thing to me is how often they focus on traits,
Mm,
implying personality traits, which implies for many people a fixedness.
right.
I'm an introvert, and that means I'll never be an effective leader. You got to be extroverted. That's limited and inhibit thinking right there, and highly unfortunate. And in fact, for the introverts in the audience, there's in recent years there's several books out about the advantages
Right.
of aversion. So if you're introverted and you consider yourself introverted and hold yourself back from leadership roles, make a point. Check out online, find what looks like the best looking book about introversion and leadership, and you
Mm,
can easily get inspired. I think that way. But anyway, I hate the trait perspective. A related thing I really drives me crazy is the most important trait.
mm,
And and now I'm laughing again to myself because I did write a column that I titled "The Most Important Trait." Really, is but the content was about what Professor Little calls free traits, the
mm,
fact that you're not stuck in a box. But
mm,
anyway, I don't like those things.
mm,
Beyond traits, the other focus of most of those articles is relationships, and
mm,
that's totally appropriate in the sense that leadership is a human activity, and leaders go wrong when they don't embrace that point.
mm,
My added point that I write about regarding leadership is I think the focus on traits and relationships, the relationships thing very good. The trait thing overplayed, I believe.
mm,
But what's missing in both of those is problem solving and opportunity capturing. That focuses on the behaviors that leaders engage in collaboration with other people. And that includes the proaction, which is about creating useful change with the future in mind. So that stuff is behavioral rather than traits and the relationship orientation. And repeating, the relationship thing is vital. But I think what is really underplayed across all the blogs ever written is the problem solving, how you make decisions.
Mm.
Leaders have to know how to make good decisions and solve problems and capture opportunities.
Right.
Those are my pet peeves.
Sure. So we've already come to the end of our time, and it's gone so fast. It's been really inspiring, Tom, just from my own personal perspective, to get hold of that book which Hilton says he has and see what are the opportunities I can start working on and becoming more proactive. And maybe just a quick check out with each person. Hilton, do you want to just give some
Yeah,
closing
I mean, it feels
comments?
like we could carry on talking for hours. I'm kind of interested, maybe just as a throwaway comment, Tom, like what are you reading right now? What are you watching? What's grabbed your attention?
Um, from a psychology perspective, the whole virus thing has a lot of built-in experiments, and that's
Mm,
going to be really interesting. It was already very interesting, and I think a future of psychology will turn more attention to societal challenges and how psychology can help people improve their
right.
lives. The challenge is just getting bigger and bigger. By the way, one thing I think I haven't mentioned, but real quick, I think a very important domain of proaction or proactivity is on an individual or group level is for people to break out of their silos and cross bridges or cross span
Mm,
boundaries into other silos and create
mm.
collaborations.
Work across the aisle.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yes. Uh-huh.
Mm,
And by the way, back to President Trump, I think he's fascinating. I think there are so many flippant ways to comment in one way or another about Trump, but I think he can be a very interesting example for thinking about leadership lessons.
yeah, because he's such a caricature in some way that
Yes,
like he takes all those things to such an extreme that you
yes.
wonder how he's not even aware of them.
And I'm afraid, yes, yes. And I'm afraid people don't learn from him because he's such an extreme.
Mm,
Relevant to me, but I think he can be. I think there's a lens seeing him as relevant, worth looking through, seeing him as relevant. What if I got more extreme in some of my approaches?
right.
What do I need to avoid? Anyway, I like your
Mm,
caricature word. Yes.
yeah. Yeah, but thanks from my side, Tom.
Yeah. Sorry,
Amy?
Tom, did I cut you off?
Oh no, I was. I did want to say I've enjoyed it thoroughly, and I
Mm,
thank you, and I've appreciated your questions, giving me food for thought and more to think about.
mm.
Yes, and then just from my side, thank you so much, Tom. I've got some really interesting insights and I think tips and tricks to think of moving forward and apply proactivity in my application of psychology moving forward.
Cool. And I'll be interested at some point learning more about your thesis. Good luck with
Thank you
that.
so much.
Thank you so much, Tom. It was a real privilege to host you. This is our first online podcast, and we look forward to hosting you again. There's so much more. We did not get to all the questions, and it was just effortless to have the conversation. So we'll definitely reach out again in the future.
Well done by you all, and I thank you very much. Totally enjoyable.
Thanks so much for listening to the episode today. Really appreciate it. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're keen. Check out our blogs and previous episodes on www.omnicor.co.za. And if you indeed did make it to the end of the episode, please DM me on the Omnicor Twitter handle, and I will make sure that you get a prize. Probably an edible one, I'm not sure, we'll have to see. And if you're interested to know how proactive you are, Hilton has offered to help you do an assessment. It's Tom Bateman's assessment. So send him an email, hilton@omnicor.co.za, and you can have your proactivity measured and a little mini feedback given to you by Hilton. Thank you so much again for listening.